Well, on the surface, he was that incredible, uh, ignorant bigot.
At 76, Jean Stapleton finally admitted the truth about Carroll O'Connor. At least, that's what millions of people online have come to believe. But what exactly was this truth? And did she ever really say it? For decades, fans of All in the Family have been fascinated by the friendship and tension between Edith and Archie Bunker, the couple who defined American television in the 1970s. But behind the laughter and applause, there were whispers of arguments, creative clashes, and even a secret confession that Jean supposedly made years after the show ended. So where did this mysterious claim come from? Why do so many believe it? And what was the real relationship between two of television's most unforgettable stars? Let's uncover what really happened, because the story you think you know about Jean Stapleton and Carroll O'Connor may not be the one that's true. Before the rumors, the whispers, and the so-called confession, there was simply Archie and Edith Bunker. When All in the Family first aired in 1971, America had never seen anything quite like it. Carroll O'Connor brought Archie to life with his sharp tongue, explosive temper, and surprising vulnerability. Jean Stapleton, as Edith, became the gentle heart of the show, soft-spoken, endlessly patient, and always the emotional balance to Archie's fire. The two of them didn't just play a married couple, they created something that felt real. Their chemistry was so natural that audiences often forgot they were acting. People believed in Archie and Edith. They saw their parents, their neighbors, or even themselves in that living room in Queens. But while fans were laughing at Archie's outbursts or Edith's endearing confusion, something deeper was happening between the actors behind the scenes, a quiet respect that would evolve over the years into one of television's most fascinating partnerships. Jean Stapleton was very different from Edith. Serious, thoughtful, and dedicated to her craft, she had spent decades in theater before All in the Family, honing her skills on Broadway. Carroll O'Connor was brilliant but unpredictable, outspoken about scripts, direction, and the show's social messages. Their working relationship was professional but occasionally tense. Norman Lear noted that their commitment to authenticity made disagreements inevitable. Playing America's most controversial couple meant the emotions were real, and even scripted arguments carried extra weight. As the show became a cultural landmark, fame brought challenges. O'Connor was typecast as Archie, while Stapleton struggled with being forever linked to Edith, a character she saw as more complex than audiences realized. When she left the show in 1979, it surprised fans, but she wanted to move beyond a role that had defined her for years. Carroll O'Connor took her departure hard. Publicly, he supported her decision. Privately, he struggled with it. The dynamic between Archie and Edith had been the heart of All in the Family, and without her, he knew things would never be the same. When Stapleton left, she said something that stayed with fans for years. Edith has run her course. There's no more story to tell. To most people, it sounded like a simple farewell, but to others, it hinted at something deeper, maybe even resentment or unspoken conflict. It was the first spark that would later fuel wild speculation. Because when Carroll O'Connor continued on with Archie Bunker's Place, a spin-off that lasted 4 more years, people noticed something missing. The laughter wasn't quite the same, and neither was Archie. Without Edith, he seemed lonelier, softer, more human. Fans began to wonder if that mirrored the real world too. And that question, what really happened between Jean Stapleton and Carroll O'Connor, would slowly turn into the foundation of a rumor that refused to die. But where did that rumor actually begin? And why did so many believe it? That's where the story gets even stranger. Like most Hollywood myths, this one didn't begin in a press conference or an interview. It started quietly, in fragments. A quote here, a blog post there, and a headline designed to stop you mid-scroll. At 76, Jean Stapleton finally admits the truth about Carroll O'Connor. The claim was intriguing enough to spark endless curiosity, but when people tried to find the original source, they hit a wall. There was no interview, no magazine article, no video clip, just recycled text, copied from one entertainment site to another, each slightly reworded to sound more authentic. Over time, this repetition gave the illusion of truth. It's the classic formula for viral misinformation. Say something dramatic enough, and sooner or later, people people start to believe it must have come from somewhere. The problem? The dates made no sense. Jean Stapleton was born in 1923, which means she turned 76 in 1999. Carroll O'Connor passed away 2 years later, in 2001, at age 76 himself. There was no known statement, confession, or revelation by Stapleton at that time, at least nothing that even remotely involved a truth about O'Connor. The story likely began from a misunderstanding of O'Connor's later interviews. In his final years, he spoke about loss, pain, and the impact of all in the family. In one interview, he said, "Jean understood Archie better than anyone. She brought the light that made him human somehow." That line was flipped. Clickbait articles framed it as Stapleton revealing something about O'Connor. Add the phrase, "at 76," and confusion was inevitable. By the mid-2000s, tabloids were using similar headlines for many celebrities. At 68, she revealed the truth about her co-star. At 75, he finally confessed what really happened. These were designed for clicks, not accuracy, and Jean Stapleton's name, tied to a beloved show, fit perfectly. Once the rumor took hold, it evolved. Some versions claimed that Stapleton had admitted she secretly disliked O'Connor's politics. Others suggested she had confessed to a falling out that was never repaired. None of them offered a shred of verifiable proof. Still, the intrigue was irresistible. The very idea that Edith Bunker, the kindest woman on television, might have held back a deep secret added fuel to the story. And because both actors had passed away by the time these articles gained traction, there was no one left to correct the record. Silence, in this case, sounded like confirmation. But while the confession story spread like wildfire, something even stranger was hiding underneath. The timeline didn't just make the rumor unlikely, it made it impossible. And once you see the full picture, it becomes clear that this wasn't a secret at all, but a misunderstanding that spiraled into myth. If you line up the dates, the entire rumor begins to fall apart almost instantly. On the surface, the headline, "At 76, Jean Stapleton finally admitted the truth about Carroll O'Connor," sounds plausible. But when you look closer, the math doesn't hold. Jean Stapleton was born on January 19, 1923, turning 76 in 1999. Carroll O'Connor, born August 2, 1924, reached 76 in 2000. By then, O'Connor faced serious health issues, and Stapleton was largely retired, focusing on theater and family. There is no record, no article, interview, or recording of her making any admission that year or afterward. Jean Stapleton was known for avoiding tabloid attention and disliked fame. After All in the Family ended, she focused on stage work and small guest roles. When asked about Carroll O'Connor, she always spoke warmly, calling him a brilliant, complicated man who gave Archie Bunker his depth. Hardly the words of someone revealing a hidden truth. Another problem, the supposed confession, is often linked to O'Connor's death in 2001, suggesting Stapleton spoke after he passed. But she would have been 78, not 76, making the headline's timeline impossible. Confusion grew after Carroll O'Connor's death at 76. Obituaries focused on his final years, outspoken nature, and rumored on-set tensions. At the same time, people revisited old All in the Family interviews with Jean Stapleton, where she reflected thoughtfully on their work together. These calm comments were often taken out of context and paired with sensational headlines, creating a misleading story. One later article even ran the headline, "At 76, Jean Stapleton finally told the truth. Carroll O'Connor's hidden side revealed." But the truth referred to Archie Bunker's character development, not O'Connor personally. By the time it spread online, that context was lost, giving the impression of a dramatic confession that never happened. Once the internet rewrites your words, there's no getting them back. And perhaps the most ironic part of all this is that Jean Stapleton did reveal a truth about Carroll O'Connor, just not the kind anyone expected. It wasn't scandalous or bitter. It was something honest, even touching, that showed how much respect she really had for him. But before we get to that, it's worth exploring why so many people still believe there was conflict between them. Why audiences wanted to believe this rumor in the first place. Because sometimes the myths we choose to believe say more about us than they do about the people we're talking about. When facts are scarce, stories fill the gaps. And that's what happened with Jean Stapleton and Carroll O'Connor. The confession headline sparked fan theories, some harmless, others imagining conflicts that never existed. Many believed Stapleton resented O'Connor's dominance, with Archie Bunker overshadowing Edith's gentle presence. But interviews from from the 1970s show the opposite. She praised O'Connor for carrying the enormous weight of portraying someone who could be cruel one moment and tender the next. Another theory suggested their off-screen relationship mirrored their on-screen marriage, with O'Connor being gruff and Stapleton enduring him. Those who worked on All in the Family dismissed this entirely. Norman Lear called their bond professional but filled with mutual admiration, and director John Rich said they were different kinds of artists, but when they were in character together, it was magic. Still, not everyone wanted to believe that things were peaceful. Some fans thrive on the idea of behind-the-scenes drama, especially when a show is as emotionally charged as All in the Family. In online discussions, a few people claimed that Stapleton once refused to appear in a reunion special because she couldn't work with Carroll anymore. That story spread like wildfire, yet it was based on nothing more than a rumor posted on an early internet message board. The truth was far simpler. She had moved on from the role and didn't want to revisit it, saying in a later interview that Edith's story had already been told. Then there's the darker theory that Jean Stapleton's so-called admission was a regret. Some believed she had confessed to being too distant from Carroll O'Connor in his final years, that maybe they had lost touch, and she regretted not reaching out. It's a sentimental idea, and while it may tug at the heart, it doesn't match the record. Jean was deeply private, but those close to her say she always spoke fondly of O'Connor, even after his death. She often called him a dear friend, and described how they stayed in contact after All in the Family ended. So why did people cling to these myths? Partly because the characters they created were so convincing. Archie and Edith's marriage wasn't simple. It was filled with arguments, contradictions, and affection that never needed to be spoken aloud. Viewers projected that same complexity onto the real actors, assuming the line between fiction and reality had blurred. It's the same phenomenon that happens when fans believe two co-stars must secretly dislike each other simply because their characters fight on screen. In the end, none of these fan theories hold up under scrutiny, but they do reveal something fascinating. Audiences were so emotionally attached to Archie and Edith that they wanted to believe there was more to their story than what they saw on television. And when you love something that deeply, it's hard to accept that the truth might be simpler and kinder than the rumor suggests. Still, one question remained unanswered. If the confession never happened, then what did Jean Stapleton actually say about Carroll O'Connor? Because there was a moment, an interview few people remember, where Jean finally spoke from the heart about her co-star. And what she revealed wasn't bitter or scandalous. It was something far more human. For all the gossip and speculation, the truth was never hidden. It was simply overlooked. Jean Stapleton didn't need to confess anything about Carroll O'Connor because she had already spoken about him many times in her own quiet, thoughtful way. Her words weren't sensational, but they were sincere, and they tell a story of two artists who respected each other more deeply than most people ever realized. In the early 1980s, a few years after All in the Family ended, Jean appeared in a rare interview where she was asked about Carroll. The interviewer hinted at rumors of tension on set. Jean didn't hesitate. She said, "Carroll was fiercely intelligent and committed to truth in performance. He challenged everything, not because he was difficult, but because he cared. That passion is what made Archie Bunker unforgettable." It wasn't a confession, it was admiration. She understood that Carroll's intensity came from a place of artistic honesty, not ego. And if anything, that honesty brought out the best in both of them. They balanced each other, her calm against his fire, her warmth against his sharpness. Together, they created one of television's most iconic relationships, not in spite of their differences, but because of them. Years later, when Archie Bunker's place continued without her, reporters often asked if she regretted leaving. Her answer was always graceful: "No regrets. I knew Archie would carry on." Carroll had more to say through him. It was his creation as much as anyone's. That statement alone reveals how much faith she had in his talent. She wasn't resentful, she was proud. When Carroll O'Connor passed away in 2001, tributes poured in from across Hollywood. But one of the most touching came from Jean Stapleton herself. She released a brief statement that read, "Carroll's heart was as big as Archie's opinions. He made me laugh every day, even when the cameras weren't rolling." That single line dismantles the myth completely. There was no feud, no bitterness, no secret resentment, only affection, wrapped in the kind of understated grace that defined Jean's entire career. Even in her later years, when she rarely gave interviews, Jean spoke warmly of her time on All in the Family. She credited Carroll for teaching her about time timing, rhythm, and courage in comedy. In one of her final appearances at a television tribute, she said, "Carroll was bold. He was brave enough to be disliked on television so that the audience could see themselves more clearly." That was the truth Gene had been sharing all along: Carroll O'Connor's strength as an actor, his willingness to take risks, and his belief that comedy could change minds. It wasn't scandalous, but it was powerful, revealing an artistic connection that went beyond friendship or fame. Perhaps that's why so many missed it. The internet craves drama, not devotion. Jean's real confession was quieter. She loved working with O'Connor, respected him deeply, and believed they created something that would outlast them both. Even with the truth out there, one question remains: why do these myths keep returning? Why do we rewrite the past to make it more dramatic than it really was? This is where the story shifts to what the rumor actually says about us. If there's one thing Hollywood has always thrived on, it's the space between truth and imagination. Once a story leaves the hands of the people who lived it, it becomes something else, a reflection of what audiences want to believe. The rumor about Gene Stapleton's confession didn't survive for decades because it was true. It survived because it felt like it could be true. There's something irresistible about the idea that two legendary actors, so perfectly matched on screen, might have shared a hidden tension off camera. It gives their story another layer of intrigue, another reason for fans to keep talking about them long after they're gone. People love to imagine that art imitates life, that Archie and Edith's complicated marriage reflected a real struggle between Carroll and Gene. But the evidence says otherwise. The truth is, audiences have always struggled to separate characters from the actors who play them. When you spend years watching a couple laugh, fight, and grow old together on television, they start to feel like family. You become invested, not just in what's written in the script, but in the possibility that their on-screen bond continues behind the scenes. And when the cameras stop rolling, it's human nature to fill that void with stories. That's exactly what happened here. After both actors passed away, nostalgia for All in the Family reached new heights. Clips resurfaced on YouTube, fans reminisced in online forums, and new audiences discovered the show for the first time. Somewhere in that swirl of emotion, the rumor resurfaced, fueled by headlines designed to look like news and shared thousands of times by people who simply wanted to remember the past. But there's another reason this particular myth refuses to die. Gene Stapleton herself was an enigma. Unlike many stars of her time, she kept her private life completely separate from her public image. She didn't chase interviews or appear on red carpets. That mystery left room for speculation. And when someone so admired stays silent, people often mistake that silence for hidden meaning. At its core, the rumor says as much about us as it does about Gene or Carroll. We crave stories that make legends human. We want to believe there's a final truth behind every partnership, every smile, every tear we see on screen. But real life rarely offers that kind of dramatic closure. Sometimes relationships, especially creative ones, are exactly what they appear to be: complicated, passionate, but rooted in respect. Gene Stapleton and Carroll O'Connor gave television one of its most iconic pairings because they understood that truth better than anyone. Their connection didn't need to end in scandal or confession to be meaningful. It simply was. And maybe that's the lesson hidden beneath all the noise, that sometimes the quiet truths are the ones that last the longest. Because while rumors fade and headlines vanish, Archie and Edith's laughter still echoes through living rooms everywhere. And that, more than any made-up confession, is the legacy both of them left behind. In the end, the truth about Gene Stapleton and Carroll O'Connor isn't about hidden grudges or secret confessions. It's about two extraordinary performers who changed television forever. Together, they brought to life a couple who argued, laughed, and loved in a way that felt deeply real. So real that people are still talking about them half a century later. Gene once said, "Acting was about finding the humanity inside the words." Carroll did that, turning Archie Bunker into a fully realized character, full of contradictions and heart. Gene provided the perfect counterbalance: kindness without weakness, warmth without naivety. They didn't just play characters, they reflected America back to its audiences. Their bond wasn't drama, it was trust. Each knew how far they could push the other, on and off camera. That trust made All in the Family more than a sitcom. It became cultural history. Despite false stories, the truth remains. Gene Stapleton and Carroll O'Connor were true partners in every sense. Decades after the final episode episode aired, people still quote Archie's sharp one-liners and Edith's tender responses. Their performances still feel alive, still relevant, and still deeply human. That's the kind of truth no rumor can erase. So, the next time you come across a headline claiming that Jean Stapleton finally admitted something shocking, remember this: she already told the truth, just not the kind of truth that sells headlines. Her truth was respect, friendship, and gratitude for a man who helped her create something timeless. Because the greatest secret between Jean Stapleton and Carroll O'Connor was that there wasn't one. Just two artists doing what they love, giving us something unforgettable in the process. If you enjoyed this deep dive into television history, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the real people behind the legends. And tell us in the comments, what do you remember most about Archie and Edith Bunker? We'd love to hear your thoughts.